Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session titled Understanding the Needs of Children and Young People with FASD to Effectively Engage with the Education System. We're so sorry for the delay in getting started today. We're aware that we're a few minutes late. It wouldn't be 2020 if we didn't have some technical issues, would it? So my name is Hayley Passmore and I'm a researcher at the Telethon Kids Institute based in Perth, Western Australia. And I'm also a member of the national team, which is part of the FASD Research Australia Centre of Research Excellence. So I'm so grateful for the FASD Hub for inviting me to be today's moderator for the session. I think today's going to be really interactive and quite a practical session. And I hope that all of those who are listening will be able to walk away from today with some different skills and strategies that our guests have shared. So before we get started, I would just like to begin by acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of the land and waters of Australia. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we also acknowledge the Indigenous people of Aotearoa. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and Maori people joining us today. So just to provide you with an overview of what we'll hear about today, we have 4 guests with us and they are parents and carers of individuals with FASD, as well as education professionals who have a number of different roles. We know that there are many others who did want to join us today as speakers and also as participants, but I'm aware it can be really challenging to make the time for events like this. So for those who have been able to join us as guests and speakers, and also for those who are listening in, we're so grateful for your time and we really hope that you find today valuable. A couple of reminders before we get started. We do have a Q&A function, so you are able to type in some questions throughout the entire session, and towards the end we will have time available to go through some of those questions, and we hope we can get through all of them. Just to let you know, we also have a graphic recorder recording the session with us today. So that's Will Besson from Tuna Blue. He will be drawing the discussions that we're having today, and those illustrations will be available after today's session. I think we'll also check in with him towards the end and see some of his handiwork, but you will be able to access them later, so don't worry if you do miss that part. Okay, we are going to go to our first speaker today, and that is Neil Reynolds. So just to introduce you to Neil, Neil is passionate about assisting his 2 children with FASD and all children and parents who are travelling a similar journey by learning, sharing and spreading as much positive information about FASD that is available. He provides lived experience as a member of a number of different advisory and steering groups, and that's where I've had the honour of working with Neil Reynolds before. And he regularly presents at conferences and workshops to educate professionals and staff working with people with FASD. So Neil, if you could kick us off for today, my first question for you is, from your experience, what are the difficulties for your children who both have FASD when they're trying to meet the expectations of the classroom environment?
Well, first of all, hi everybody, and thanks for tuning in. I think the most difficult thing for everybody involved with children with FASD is just the total lack of understanding, both from the parents and also the education staff, about what's involved with FASD and how to deal with it. You know, the problem for these children is that they have a constant lack of success, and that constant failure drives them into frustration and the inability not to be able to do what lots of other children do make it extremely difficult for them to survive in the classroom environment. And part of that is fueled in the education department because of the inadequate structure you have for these children. It's very, very important that they have a constant, concrete support base around them, and most classrooms, unfortunately, because of the number of children and of that lack of experience, means that they just don't get the opportunity to do that, and all those things impact on the child and often create an inability to self-regulate within the classroom and to deal with those pressures, and therefore behaviours are often way off the scale, it makes it just a total inability for the children to be able to survive adequately within the classroom. And that just compacts just not on them, but also on parents when they go home, and of course clearly on the education staff trying to deal with it. And the sad thing we've found from our children about that is that it can be changed very easily without expending any great amount of money or putting in a lot of things other than basic supports. If all these children had a concrete, structured support around them with people that understood and were well educated into the difficulties they confront, they can be very successful, and we've seen that. You know, we have a child that's gone from 5 years ago, the worst child ever to go to the school she goes to, and the worst child that the principal had ever seen, to now a child that sits in class, is fully engaged, probably one of the better behaved children in the school. Still a long way behind with the learning skills because of the difficulties that FASD presents, but it just goes to show that if you put the structure in place and you can educate yourself to understand how these kids are and work together between the parents and the school so that everybody's in that community, all pushing in the same direction, all rowing their boat in the same direction, we've got some hope of actually presenting these kids with an opportunity to get through their education without the difficulties that they currently encounter. I don't know if there's a lot more I can say, except that clearly we need to work together between parents and teachers to create a scenario that allows these kids to be successful, because that's the key, I believe, to helping these children to become adequate within the classroom, is to create a successful environment for them. So, and how you go about that is a varying situation. Certainly with ours, we worked hard between myself, my wife, and the teachers and the supporting staff within the school to be able to create a successful environment. And consequently, they, as I said, our daughter's gone from the worst child at school to now a very, very normal, everyday child sitting in a classroom, fully engaged in learning, trying to do her best. So there is hope.
Neil, thank you so much for sharing that story. I have spoken to you before about this, but I always love hearing about the successes of both of your children, and hopefully we have time to talk about that, because they are just both two wonderful children, and you and the community around you have done such a magnificent job. I think it's also, oh, sorry.
I was going to say that, and that's the thing is, so our first child went through all those difficulties, and we've seen a completely different journey with her younger brother because of the experience that school has had and the effort they've taken to create a community. So every teacher is undertaking training, every supportive staff, right down to the gardener, is undertaking training. And her little brother is coming through school with a completely different schooling experience. And that all goes back to the simple investment that school has taken in my children. So I greatly appreciate the effort of those staff members that have really gone out of the way to help them to support their success in their school.
That is just so wonderful to hear. And keeping on a similar line, we're going to now speak to our second guest. So we have Nicole Van Ingen with us today. So Nicole is the principal at Holy Trinity School, Ashfont, in regional New South Wales. She is a long-term foster carer and adoptive parent to a child diagnosed with FASD. And Nicole is passionate about access to education for all children, regardless of their socioeconomic status or their place of residence. So Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. And I have a similar question to that which I've just asked to Neil, about what are the difficulties that you've seen for children and young people with FASD when trying to meet the expectations of the school environment.
Thanks, Hayley. I thought I'd speak about three key difficulties that I see as a parent and as a principal. The first one, self-regulation. The second one's sustaining relationships, because it's really hard when you're not regulated, when you're not calm, when you can't deal with disappointment, to sustain peer relationships. And the third one is remaining connected to important adults, which I think ties in to what Neil was talking about before, about supporting our kids. So if our young people don't have these foundations, then they just can't access the curriculum and be successful and have a healthy self-esteem. So how can we support? Well, first of all, these things aren't just for children with or young people with FASD. These things we use broadly with children with autistic spectrum disorder, children with trauma, children with general issues with self-regulation and sensory processing. So the first thing that we try to offer broadly across the school is sensory breaks. And for some of our children with high needs, we offer these as frequently as every 60 minutes. So the challenge for this is that sometimes teachers will link that sensory break to behaviour. So we'll hear things like, well, when you finish that page of writing, then you can go and have your sensory break. Well, actually, no, letting them have their sensory break when it's due will help them to finish that piece of writing. So sensory breaks, and we usually have a bucket or a tub, and we have about 10 or 20 different cards in there, and they just pull one out. So it's a lot of things that occupational therapists would recommend. So blowing through a straw to blow a ping pong ball across the table to someone else. Hopping under a weighted blanket and sitting there in a cave. Something simple like a book in a box. So you've got cardboard boxes of various sizes, and children choose to sit in them, or washing baskets, and they just simply reach a book for a few minutes. We've got lycra tunnels. Kmart's your best friend here when you're talking about loss.
Thank you, Nicole. Did you want to add on to that?
Sure. I'm just here for someone.
Oh, sorry, we might come back to you. There's just a couple of technical issues. We couldn't quite hear you properly, but we will check in with you soon. And I really appreciate those practical strategies that you just provided, and they're really quite tangible things that are easily accessible, both ready to go things that you can use in the classroom that many of us just have lying around our homes. So thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful to know. We're keeping on a similar line of discussion, actually, talking about the interaction between schools and families. We're going to go to our third guest now, Judith King. Judith is the principal at North Woodvale Primary School in the Perth metro area, and she was previously the principal at East Kalgoorlie Primary School in the WA Goldfields area. In recognition of Judith's leadership and innovative practice, she was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2018, which was called Schools Impacting Communities: How Schools Can Change Communities to Create Students That Are Ready to Thrive and Learn. So really relevant to what Nicole and Neil have both already said today. So Judith, I wanted to ask you, what do you think makes a successful relationship between schools and families work?
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. It's really great to see some familiar faces. I know I've met some of you before, so nice to be connecting with everybody again. It's a really good question, and I think the key to all of this always comes back to relationships and making sure that you have genuine, real relationships with not only the kids in the classrooms, but with the families and with your community. The lack of judgment. I know we used to do a lot of work with our staff around step back and remove any judgment. Don't be looking at what the family's not doing or whatnot. Our job is to get in, how can we help with the family? So often when your kids are struggling as much as some of the kids that are coming to our schools with FASD, then the families actually need a little bit of support. So how as a school can we actually reach out and provide that little bit of extra support for families? Around the world, it looks a lot like a community school model. So whether you call that a community school approach, whatever you link to, but providing real spaces within your school for your community. As they say in Canada, leaving the lights on so that your community can be accessing your school at any hours. Building up a very trusting relationship where families can come to you for anything is the key to actually making the difference. I think the schools where it works best, and I know listening to Nicole, I'm sure there's a lot of this happening at her school, and it certainly would be when Neil's children are going, the schools that are looking outside the traditional boundaries of what we think of as a school and really looking outside the box and saying, what do we need to do differently to not only support our students, but support our families and bring everyone together to work together, because that's where we will actually make genuine change. Interconnectedness across systems, particularly our government sectors. How can we bring health in to be supporting our kids and our families in a different way? Some of our families that are really presented with challenging situations don't always have the ability to access these services. Can that be a model we bring into our schools to further support our students and our families? Again, so lucky to see the community school approach in action, but again, everything comes back to how strong is your relationship. One of our biggest key factors that made a big difference at East Kalgoorlie was having what we called a family partnership coordinator, basically. So her job was to go out, work with families and support families. So if one of our students came in and they were having an extra difficult day, she got in the car and she went and saw that family and said, what's going on? How can we help? It was never from a judgment perspective, but open arms, what can we do to support you and your family? And that's what made the biggest difference with our kids.
Judith, thank you so much. That is so helpful to understand. And I really appreciate how you spoke about the need to have cross agencies involved in this, because it isn't all about education. There are a number of different agencies that should be available to families. And when we think about it, school is our #1 primary intervention that everyone has access to. So if we can utilise that to have a number of different things happening, that's, you know, the prime opportunity.
And we do know that's very much needed, don't we, Hayley?
I completely agree. I certainly do. Thank you, Judith. We are going to pop over to our fourth guest for today, who is Tracy Jongans. So Tracy is a head of department overseeing learning acceleration at Linwood College, a year 7 to 13 college in Christchurch, New Zealand. So thank you for joining us despite the time difference. Tracy is also a mum of a 23-year-old who is living with FASD, and for the last 10 years she has been passionately raising awareness of FASD within the education community throughout New Zealand, including helping to inform the creators of an online teaching resource called Guide to FASD and Learning, which is available on the Inclusive Education website established by the New Zealand Ministry of Education. So thank you, Tracy, and I believe you've prepared a presentation for us today titled Supporting Those with FASD in School. So I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
I've had a lot of technical issues for the last 4 hours, so hopefully this is going to happen. Am I in control of my screen, or is somebody else going to be in control of my PowerPoint?
If you can just let us know when you'd like to go to the next slide, we can happily control that for you. Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Good evening. It's 9 o'clock in New Zealand evening time. This is a whakatauki, which is our Māori community have whakatauki, which are like words of wisdom to share, and this is whakatauki that supports the work that I do with my children at school, and I think it fits very really well with the FASD community. So, ko te ahure o te tamaiti arahia o tātou mahi, let the uniqueness of the child guide our work. So that's something that underlines and underpins everything I do in education, which is why I've shared it today as part of this. If we can move on, please. So I haven't heard what's previously happened this evening, but I'm just going to share with you where I'm at. So I was asked to make this talk about things that and teaching that can support young people with FASD, and I think it all starts right with this frame here, with this what it says on the screen. So this is something that I got actually off Facebook many years ago, and I've tracked down the person who created this, and the link is there. But I think it's all about reframing the behaviour, looking at not looking at the won't what the child is doing, their behaviours, but looking at their behaviour from a perspective that maybe there's something else going on and we need to support that. So changing, which I know that Diane Melbourne in the States, I mean, she's talked about this, changing the won't to can't, and I think that that's where it sits very much with our children around FASD. So just really quickly, if we change our won't to can't, as you can see on the screen there, then it changes the way we think about that young person. It changes us from blaming them and from making the problem all about them to actually making us wonder what's going on that's making it difficult for this person to do what we want them to do. And once we start doing that, then we become I think it says down there, we become like detectives and we try to find ways around that. So I think with a young person with FASD, as we know, they've got very complex needs. I know in our schools in New Zealand, it's highly unlikely we will not know that that person has FASD, as we have a very, very low rate of diagnosis. So we're looking at these children coming into our classrooms and not really coping with what we're putting in front of them. So changing the thinking from won't to making it about can't then makes us try to find ways to help them. So moving on. So when we're thinking about FASD, I've borrowed these from elsewhere, but there are 3 R's that we need to think about: relationship, repetition, routines, and the 5 S's, which I've got there: support, structure, supervision, strength-based, and keeping it simple. So moving on, I've just unpacked some of those in the rest of this presentation. So the next slide, building a trusting relationship, and I believe that this is the key to understanding the needs of these young people in our schools. It is so important that we take time to know who they are as young people, know them as learners, and there's a wee strategy out there which I totally love, that 2 times 10 strategy, spending 2 minutes every day for 10 days talking with the learner about whatever they want to talk about, just as an opportunity to really meet them in a place that's safe for them and not necessarily about school or about learning, and just getting to know who they are as young people. It's really important that we identify their strengths, because every young person with FASD has strengths, and it's really important to find them. It's great if you've got a diagnosis, because the strengths will be outlined quite clearly in that. But if not, then you've got to do lots of detective work to find out where that sits. Obviously, working with whānau. Whānau is our Māori word for family, and it's quite it's thinking about an extended family. So typically in a Māori community, there'd be the aunties and the uncles and all the cousins and the extended family. So working with the whānau, whoever that may be, and really collaborating together, because the whānau are the experts, they know their children, and they're the ones that can help us understand them better. And then obviously, you know, encouraging and specific praise. And I'm going to go into that last point a little bit further on, so we can move on. And this is a list of strategies to support routines. So once you've got your relationship established and you know a little bit about this young person, then you can fit these things around what they need. So it's looking at their can'ts, the bits that are for them, because as we know, every young person with FASD is unique in their own right. So just because one young person might be in your classroom previously who's had FASD, their strengths and their needs are not going to be the same as the next child that comes into your classroom. So it's really important to set this all in that relationship space. So I'm not going to read through all that list because we can all do that, but just a couple of things I'd like to point out there. You know, we know that our young people with FASD often will have slow processing, and I've got a little point there where it says provide activities for fast finishers. So rather than focusing on the fact that this young person is working at a slower pace, what I've tried to do there is shift the focus. So it's actually in the classroom having, you know, all your activities and things set out, but also having specific activities for people who finish quickly so that they can carry on working at other things that are still helpful, meaning that that young person who's taking a little bit longer is able just to carry on, which is a lot more inclusive than focusing just on their need, which I've tried to put there. So another really important thing there, I guess, is the you know, structuring the activities so that the young person with FASD is, they understand that there is this bit that I need to do, and there's this bit that I can choose to do as my reward at the end of it, whatever that may look like in the classroom. I think the other really cool thing I've tried to pull out there, thinking of our teachers in our classrooms in New Zealand, is planning for learning assistants to support the independent learners in the classroom and the teacher to actually do the extra work with the young people who need that extra support. So often we put the children with the needs with the learning assistants or the teacher aides, whereas if we flip that around, then it means that the teacher can give their, you know, I mean, they've got the skills and they've got the knowledge, and it's really great when we can use that to support our young people who have the higher needs. So moving on. So sensory needs can be quite obvious, but they can also be quite discreet, depending on the child. However, I think that these things are really relevant for many children. I think obviously that first thing up the top there, using a calm voice and a manner at all times is absolutely vital. And as teachers, that's really important for us to learn that skill of being able to, you know, keep ourselves under control when things get a little bit out of control around us, maybe. I've also put in there ensuring that our children have water and that they have food breaks at regular times, and that's come out of a little bit of work that I have been exposed to, where actually it comes out of somebody in South Australia who shared this with me, and she is working with autistic young people, but she was talking about interoception, and I'm not sure if people are aware of interoception, but it's actually one of the 8 senses in our body. So we have 5 external senses, but we have 3 internal senses, and interoception is one of those internal senses that helps us regulate our bodies. And I know with certainly with my own son and other young children who have you know, complex needs, they often aren't aware of what their body is telling them. For instance, they will wear summery clothes on a really cold day, or they'll wear wintry clothes on a really hot day, and then they wonder we all wonder why they're getting all stressed by the classroom, whereas actual fact their bodies are really overheated or underheated or whatever's going on for them, and they're not really recognizing that. Likewise, they often don't recognize thirst, and they often don't recognize hunger, and they often don't recognize the need to go to the toilet. So interoception is a program, well, it's a sense, but you can work with that by developing more awareness of those things in the young person's body, which then gives them greater control over you know, their regulation, because obviously if they're not hot, then they're not going to stress quite as fast as if they're completely covered in clothing on a really hot day. So that's a really cool thing to look into. The rest of it there, you know, people can read those things, but it's all about creating that classroom around the needs of a variety of young people rather than the way the teacher wants it to work sometimes. So it's about thinking about the needs of the children in your environment. So there's lots of really cool, well, I think some cool ideas in there. So moving on to the next screen. Okay, so this is about transition. So the fact that change is a really important part of our life, and we all need to need to cope with it, and we all cope in different ways. But certainly our young people with FASD, because of their concrete thinking and often slower processing, it can be a really stressful thing for them to cope with change. So I've just listed there a few ideas that you might like to think about. And I think the really important one there is the third one down, planning for change. So I've got a wee story around that, because when I've got two sons, and one of my older son, when he was a little 5-year-old at school, we start school at 5 in New Zealand, and he started his first class, and you do this amazing transition to get your children into their first class at school. And as the first year was coming to an end, I'll never forget, I mean, he's now well in his 20s, I'll never forget him saying, can I have, am I going to have some visits to my next class so I know what it's about before I get there? He didn't actually say all those words. He just said, am I going to have visits? Because he knew he was changing class, and he just assumed, because he'd had lots of visits at the start of school, that he'd have visits all the way through school. And I thought, actually, that's a really cool thing. And I think for our young people with FASD, that is a very vital step, that whenever there is a change coming up in their life, whatever it may look like, that if you can possibly plan for that and have practices and write social stories, whatever is going to work, that you give them that opportunity to really, have that time to manage that change as best they can. So I think that was a really cool thing that he taught me. On the reverse side of that, or the flip side of that, I guess, is that next comment about be sensitive to the learner's needs, because often our young people with FASD will fixate on things, and you actually don't want that to be the fixation. So it's kind of like, once again, going back to that, knowing your child, knowing the person, the child, and building that relationship. So moving on to the next screen. So we talk a lot about strengths-based teaching when we're talking about meeting the needs of young people with FASD. This is a quote that I got from the NoFAS site in the UK, and I think it's a really cool wee quote, and I use it quite a lot. And it's talking about the context of their strengths and how their strengths becoming the foundations that we can develop. They talk about personalised curricula. I'm not sure what happens in your schools in Australia, but I know in my school that I'm working in Christchurch, that we're a high school, a secondary school, and it's really interesting because these children are actually demanding that we provide a different curricula for them. They're not fitting in to what everybody else in the high school is doing, so we're having to do a more personalised curriculum, and so it's being a little bit flexible around that, and finding things that are going to work for them so they can be successful. So moving on from that, I've got a little bit more on that on the next slide. So these are a list of ideas about using that strengths-focused way of working. And there's lots of little cool ideas in there, I hope. I think the key is celebrating success. The key is breaking things down to what can be successful and then celebrating it. Setting kids up to succeed rather than to fail. So whatever that's going to take, there's some ideas on that page, and I'm sure there's lots more. I just want to draw everyone's attention to Universal Design for Learning. That's a big movement in education in New Zealand, UDL, and I really like that thinking around it. When I first heard about it, they explained it to me like a learning smorgasbord. So when you're planning your program, you're thinking of all the needs of the children in your class. So if it's a little bit like planning a dinner and thinking about the people who are vegan, the people who are dairy free, the people who are gluten free, the people who eat meat, and providing everything, something for everyone, and talking about bringing that into the classroom in that learning context of providing something that can be successful for everyone. So I really think that's a really cool way to think. And moving on. This is just a screen about, we have in New Zealand, our curriculum is broken up into the 5 key competencies that are across the top of that page there. So in all our learning areas, they're the 5 things that we are thinking about all the time. That's interesting because the bottom of the page is, oh no, it's me. I can't see the bottom of the page, hopefully you can. But across the bottom, it's got participation and I can't even think of the titles there now, but there's some other things. So they're just some activities that I think support young people with FASD sitting under each of the key competencies. Just very quickly, that idea of tuakana taina is, once again, that's come of our Māori culture, and that's that idea of having the person who's the expert working with the person who doesn't quite have the same understanding, so that buddy, if you like, or the stronger helping the weaker, or however you want to put it. So that's what tuakana taina is, and obviously in different things that relationship can change. So you can be a tuakana or a strength person in one thing, but you might be the learner in the other, in another setting. And I think probably that very last point on there, choosing your battles, is vitally important in the classroom with our young people. And you know, just really, you know, once again, go back to that relationship and knowing the things that you can push them on, and knowing the things you actually need to pull back on and support them further to succeed. And I probably should mention really quickly, and I know that I'm taking lots of time now. I've mentioned all the way through my slides, I've talked about visuals, visual cues. I haven't actually spoken about it, but I think they're on just about every slide, and the importance of having that visual as well as the verbal and the instructions. So moving on, I think I'm almost at the end. This is, I'm not sure how clear that is to everybody, but this is a fantastic little, well, as I say, tip sheet there that I got from Jacqueline Pay in Canada, and I think it's just, I love it. I probably like the visual effect of it actually. But basically you've got this child in the middle there. The reds are all the things that, the behaviours that you're seeing and how you're thinking of them as a won't. Yellow is changing that thinking to the can't, and what actually else may be going on here. And then you go out to the greens, which is all really positive stuff like empowering through choice and opportunities for ownership, etc. So I'm quite happy to send that through if that's not very clear. I don't know how anybody's seen that, but I can totally send you the sheet through so that that can be sent out, because I think that's a really cool little thing to have in your classroom on your wall somewhere. And finally, I think, next slide. Yes, so this is a link to the Inclusive TKO website that Hayley, it was, wasn't it, introduced. So this is the Ministry of Education put this together, it's probably about 4 years ago now, and we were just really lucky that we got in on the ground, because we managed to get managed to ensure that there were really good links to what they were going to produce, because they were actually starting totally not knowing anything. So we were able to get the Canadian communities involved, and I think they've actually got some Australian things on there as well. So it's a really cool website, and it's very New Zealand classroom orientated, but awesome to access for anyone. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Correct. So thank you very much for having me.
Wow, Tracy, thank you so much. That was full of so much helpful information, really practical. I love the idea of a learning smorgasbord. I think that sounds incredible, and I can't wait to hear more about that. And some of the resources that you mentioned, I often also use the Brain Not Blame worksheet when I'm training other people, and also Kristen Lien's Reframe the Behaviour infographic. So we can include both of those things or links to them in the list of resources that we're sending out at the end, to make sure that everyone has access to those, because they're both fantastic. So thank you for those. I'm sure many people want to ask Tracy a number of questions, and all of our guests a number of questions, so please do keep them coming through the Q&A. While you're sending in your questions, we actually have an example of some of the resources that were developed and are accessible on that website in New Zealand that Tracy just introduced to us. So the video that we have chosen to share with you today, and Tracy, thank you to you and your colleagues for letting us share this with everyone, is called Classroom Layout to Support All Students' Learning and Wellbeing. So we're going to share that with you now.
So when we set up the classrooms for the children, we do take into consideration the needs in there. It's important that they feel like they're included within the class, yet they have a space that they can go to if they need to be away from their peers. So in room 9, there's a desk that's set up here that the student can work with. The student would work here and the adult would work here.
NICE spell? Yeah.
We put the adult on the outside so the child is closest to his peers. There are other desks sort of set up around here, and he can turn to talk to the children or show them his work at any time. Thinking behind that is that he is part of the class. Other children move to show their friends their work, so he's got that opportunity to do that as well. The teaching assistant is there beside, more camouflaged into the background, so that they can support, they can prompt and say, you could go and show your work to the children sitting here. For this particular child, this space is an area here where he can go and have some calming time. If he feels that his anxiety levels are getting higher, he can say that he needs a break and there's a space for him to go and hang out and calm himself down again.
Right, gonna get your blankie?
If we notice that he needs a break, the same thing, we can say, I think you need a break, and he will go and take a break in that quieter space. There's a swing that that this child can also use. It sort of hangs around here. This is a soothing thing for him. So when he is really feeling anxious, he likes weight on his body. So that helps calm him down, having the extra weight or closeness. It's important for the children that the layout stays similar throughout the year. And saying that, it's also good to put little changes in so that the children learn to deal with change. But all of that sort of stuff has to be done in little steps. So it might be that this space in the past might have had another wall here. So it's sort of more in, like having a wall here. So it's more of a defined space for the child. And then this wall can be taken away as the year goes on so that the space opens up and it's more part of the classroom. So this desk here is primarily in the classroom for the children with these needs, but it's also able to be used by other children. So if the child is not at the desk, if he's away, then it's another working space for children to move to. And it's important for the child to know that it's not just his space, that he doesn't own it. It's a piece of furniture in the classroom, like any other furniture in the classroom, that is for the children and the learning. It's important because every child has their own space, but yet they think that if the whole class is, they understand that everything in the class is for them, and he needs to understand that as well. Well, all children need to understand that. In room 9, there is another corner over here that has sensory break games or downtime games for children that need a break from learning to go to. They know that they can go into this space. They will have a little visual where they know they're going to do this task, then this task, then this task, and when that's done, they can take a break from the intense learning and have some downtime, and that's when they would go up here and do some work there. And that's primarily a space where they would go by themselves, so adults don't follow them in there. So the teacher assistant can roam in the classroom as well. In room 9, there's also a desk here that a teacher assistant works with another small group of children. When those children that are here or here are doing an independent activity or working with another child in the class, the adult has the opportunity to stand up and move around the room to see if there are any other children that need any support within the class, and that's encouraged. And that also creates freedom from the teacher assistant not forming a close bond with the child that they're working with or with the children that they're working with. The adults in the class are there to help all children.
Thank you. So as I said, that video and many other resources will be shared with you at the end of today's session. So we're going to move on to a little bit of a panel discussion now. So you have met all 4 of our guests today, so you can send in questions to any of them. We have a couple to get started with. So my first question is for Nicole, actually. So Nicole, why do you think it's so important that families and schools work together?
I think that it's really important, first of all, because of connection, because our children with FASD really need, and Neil was talking about this before, an anchor. And so it doesn't matter who it is at school or who it is at home. They need someone to be that anchor. And when they're away from home, they are more likely to be heightened. They are more likely to be impacted by other children because they're in bigger groups. So if we as a school have invested in the relationship early, have got a little bit of relational credit in the bank with these children because we've engaged in sensory activities with them, or we know a little bit about their likes and their dislikes, then we're more likely to be able to co-regulate with the young person when they are really struggling. We have a soft start to the day. We allow children to come in. We pay some of our staff to be there 30 minutes before the first bell goes, and we offer them just the opportunity to connect and to communicate. It's a chance for mums or dads or carers, they might have already messaged in. We've got that information and we're saying, what did you have for breakfast? How did you sleep? Did you take your medication? Is there something you need to tell me? And then there's card games with the adults or Lego or whatever. So we're just assisting them with that transition from home to school. I've learned 27 years I've been teaching. I've only been a mum to a child with FASD for 6 years, but I have learned an awful lot in that because as teachers, sometimes we will struggle with the needs and the behaviours of these children, and we will be like, that is the longest 6 hours of my life. Now, as a parent of a 6-year-old, and I'm a foster carer for a 3-year-old with likely FASD, I would say to you, yes, we've struggled for that 6 hours, but mum and dad have that child for the other 18 hours a day. And as a parent, I now know that my child's day can start at 3 a.m. because their body clock is way out. So what's happened for my child and I between 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. is a whole day's worth before their school day even starts. So if we can't communicate and work together, if the school and the professionals in the school can't recognise that it is always our job as the professionals to maintain and repair healthy, life-giving relationships with young people. It really resonated with Neil when he was talking to me about his daughter going from being the naughtiest girl in the school. As professionals, we have to separate the child from their behaviour. I can assure you, as a parent with a child with FASD, it is not targeted at you. It's a blanket rule. Everyone can be treated like that at times. Everyone can have language thrown at them or even pieces of equipment. It is not personal to the teacher. So I think that's why we need to work together to better understand the challenges at home and what goes on for them, and to also ensure that we are professional as educators and that we make every effort to preserve and repair that relationship.
Nicole, thank you so much. It's just so incredible to hear about how your personal experiences have now shaped your professional approach. I think that's really powerful, and thank you for sharing that story with us. Neil, we're going to see if you can add on to that and maybe talk about what are some of the common barriers that you see that might stop families and schools being able to work together cohesively.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that is probably the biggest barrier is poor communication. If there's not a good line of communication between the parents and the working staff of the school, it's doomed for failure. Having unrealistic expectations is often a problem for both the parents and the teaching staff, of not really understanding what the child is capable of doing. And that lack of understanding and that lack of support means that the child often will then act out in class unrealistically and make life extremely difficult for everybody. And so that's where the communication between the school and the parents is important. And I think the other thing for many education staff is to understand that the parents often understand and know more about their child than anybody else, and they can give a strong recommendation about what is the right thing. And I would suggest with my daughter's case, the first 2 years of her schooling life was wasted because despite the fact that I tried to give the staff some basic understandings of what was going on and how to deal with it, I think it was that barrier of them being the professionals and me just being, and in my case, just a foster parent, that perhaps I didn't have the professional background or the knowledge to be able to assist them. And it wasn't until it all fell in a heap and they realised that maybe what I had to say changed all that. And they started to implement some of the things that we'd implemented at home, and they worked a treat, and we've gone from strength to strength from there. So that ability to communicate with each other is the critical factor.
Thank you, Neil. And I will just say, I hope you never call yourself just a foster parent again, because you are a superhero. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I don't know about a superhero, but there's no question in our house, we are mum and dad, and they are our children, regardless of what our blood relationship may be.
Thank you. Tracy, I have a tricky question for you, actually. This is a question that I get quite often from staff that I deliver training to, and it's one that's really challenging to answer. So I'm going to ask you, in the classroom, what are successful ways that you have seen educators being able to manage the individual needs of a child versus the needs of the whole class? I can see you laughing, so I'm sorry that I'm directing this at you, but I think you'll be well equipped to answer.
That's a big question. I guess, let me think. Well, I guess one of the things that can be really powerful, and that was something I mentioned during my presentation, and that is, if they're lucky enough to have a learning assistant or teacher aide in the classroom, setting activities up so that independent workers can work independently, and then the teacher and be supervised by the learning assistant, teacher aide, and the teacher is then in a better space to be able to take a child individually or work with a couple of children or work in a small group. My background, even though I'm teaching in a secondary school, is in a primary school. I spent 10 years working in new entrants with 5-year-olds, and that would have been my daily way of working. So it's very seldom you work with a whole class of 5-year-old children because they're all at very different spaces. So I would spend a lot of my time, my planning was about planning activities so that, planning activities so that children could work independently, and you had time to work instructionally with 1 or 2 or small groups of children and rotate that through the day. That would also require a lot of practice. So generally at the start of the year, my first 3 or 4 weeks will be about setting up those routines and teaching the children, this is how you're going to do this activity, and this is what you're going to do next, so that over time they built up those skills to be able to work independently. And I know that my secondary colleagues really struggle with that thinking because that's not the way they think, but certainly in primary schools in New Zealand anyway, that's bread and butter, that children are working on different things at different times, and some children are working with the teacher and other children are doing activities. Just a little bit of insight into that is the way that classroom that you shared in the video was set up, where there was a corner for free play, if you like, and there was different activities around the classroom that children could do. So that teacher would have spent a long time teaching those basic, the behaviours and the way to work with in that environment before they would have stepped back and been able to do the instructional work. I hope that helps. That's certainly how I would be working with that.
That is really helpful. Thank you, Tracy. And my apologies that I gave you one of the tough ones. Judith, I have a question for you next. What advice would you have for schools that are struggling to engage and communicate with families?
Okay. I think coming back to what I said before, looking at how you can do things differently. So if it's not already working, then throw it out the door and look at what could we do differently to actually engage. I think one of the most successful things for us at EastCal was the development of our community room. So creating a space in the school that was felt, the community felt like they had ownership over that. That was their space. Come in every morning if you like, sit down with other parents, start really building up those relationships step by step. The other question I would ask is, have you got in the car and have you gone out to see your families and see what they need and what they would like in the school to support them further? Go and ask the question.
That's a great point. Meeting the families where they are at, not waiting for them to come to you. Really good point. Thank you. Neil, I have a question that's been sent in for you. What does your successful environment actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think, as I said, for me and for our children, the critical thing is success, but success has to have realistic expectations for a FASD child, and you can't expect that child to meet the criteria of what some of the other children are. So what we did at our school was create a structure that looked just like what everybody else was doing, but with expectations that were slightly lower than what may be the norm or the average within the class. So they can still be doing the same work everybody else is doing, but at the end of it, they can also still be successful because they get to achieve the goal that they're set upon, rather than trying to maybe get 10 out of 10. If they get 5 out of 10, or if the questions are easier, they still get the same reward for being successful regardless. And I think it's very important, and we promote to all our teaching staff to look at the positive. These kids have got lots and lots of weaknesses, but they've got some incredible strengths, and you have to find what those strengths are and use that currency to promote them in the classroom, be it their sporting skills, be it their art skills, be it whatever they can do that actually makes them stand out, because all these children, FASD children are like everybody else, they've got skills that are exceptional, and if you can promote those in the classroom, then they gain currency amongst their peers, and therefore their social aspect of schooling is so much stronger. And you know, we've certainly done that with our kids, particularly my daughter, because you know, for 3 years now she's been the best swimmer at school, and everybody knows that a sportsman at school gains great recognition. They might not be the best at ABC, and she's certainly not in that category, but she can do things that other children can't do, and that's very important to promote. And the teachers have been very conscious of promoting those and making sure that even the basic things are promoted as successful, rather than her not being able to do them, but being able to do them to the best of her ability, which is really all that's critical in her life.
Exactly. So focusing so much on the strengths-based approach.
Yeah.
I have another question for you, Neil. It's been directed at you. So can you please give some examples of concrete structured support?
Well, I can give you the most obvious example of unstructured, unconcrete support is go in the classroom, sit at your desk, get out your maths book, open it to page 22, start on question 10. Sadly for most FASD children, the bit about going to the classroom is the last thing they remember, and on the way in they meet Johnny and they have a chat and they talk about whatever happened at home the night before, and they get to their desk and they don't understand any of those things. They've forgotten it. It's completely gone out of their mind. So the structure, to be successful, the structure has to be very, very consistent, very concrete, but also very simple. One question, get in, sit down, when they sit down, it doesn't take a lot in the classroom simply to say to the child again, right, open your maths book. When they've got their maths book out, then open to page 22. When they've got to page 22, right, ask them to start on question 1, 2, or whatever the thing is, but do it in stages rather than give them multiple exercises, because they can't deal with that. And the obvious answer is, if you can't deal with something and you know you're going to fail, that's when the rejection and the negativity cuts in, and that's when you start to create a confrontational scenario. And as some of the presenters have said, confrontational scenarios happen everywhere, but with a FASD child, you're going to lose. Experience tells me that you're not going to win out of that, and the child doesn't win either. So, as I think Tracy, as professionals, you've got to change to suit the child. You've got to be responsible for that. So you've got to be flexible in that regard to make it concrete for them, and to make sure that those instructions are well understood. So even if you have to repeat them or to create a scenario where you get them to answer back to know that they understand everything, all those little things help, and making a curriculum that is within their capabilities, and keeping that consistent day-to-day. Visual diaries, as they get older, we reduce them, but often in their early days we put a visual diary so they know exactly what's happening. And if there's going to be a change, we make sure we tell them nice and early. We don't run in on Tuesday morning and say, right, you always do library now. Well, we're not doing that, we're going here. We make sure that that's structured, and we do that by having a communication book that goes backwards and forwards. So if something's going to change the next day, we're advised, so we can promote it and help them at home to advise them that that's going to happen. So when they go to school, they're not put in that stressful environment they don't understand. So doing those little things about supporting them and having, continuity around them with supports, and having someone in the classroom that's solid, that's there all the time as often as possible, helps them get through that and just makes life in the classroom that little bit easier for them.
I couldn't agree more. Those are some really helpful and practical strategies, so thank you for sharing them. And I'm sure these are things that education professionals are doing on a daily basis, but they often don't have the time to stop and think about why they might be using that particular approach. So this is a good reminder, I think, for all of us to think about why we use particular approaches and adapt things in a particular way for a young person and what their extended needs might be beyond that. I'm going to go to you, Nicole, next, actually. I have a question that's come in. How can schools be encouraged to be FASD aware when the child protection system has difficulty recognising this disability?
Yeah, good question. I would suggest, I've worked across Queensland and New South Wales, and I would suggest ACT and other states would be very similar. There's never been a better time to have your young person's needs met in education, because the new standards and the new funding model for meeting young people's needs does not rely as much on a diagnosis, which is a blessed relief to those of us caring for young people with what we feel is FASD when we can't get a diagnosis, or when some care systems are just simply not supportive of that. So what we have now is the only the need for an imputed diagnosis. We do not need a formal piece of paper that says our child has autism or has FASD. So I would encourage people to work with occupational therapists and speech therapists and get lots of information and observations from staff at the school and medical and other therapists outside of the school, psychologists, to document the child's challenges. And therefore we can compile a profile of the needs of a young person, which we would understand would come under the FASD umbrella. However, the imputed diagnosis is significant sensory needs, significant processing needs, speech language, significant emotional dysregulation, perhaps intellectual impairment or developmental delay, perhaps trauma. All of those things will give you a profile, and then the school needs to be challenged if they're not supportive to put those forward for funding, because disability standards now simply say we must provide reasonable adjustments. Well, if you have got a good, strong therapeutic profile about your young person, then reasonable adjustments can be as much as a full-time teacher support person. It can be as simple as sensory tools in the classroom. As I said, at our school, we fund that 30 minutes before school for check-in. We funded resources for a soft start. We funded resources, human and physical resources, for a relaxed curriculum in the afternoon. So there's really never been a better time for us as parents and carers to be able to have our children's needs met without necessarily needing the diagnosis. Going back 5 or 10 years ago, almost impossible. They needed a piece of paper, they needed a box to fit your child in. Some of our kids will never fit a certain box. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. We have one last question for Tracy. So it's keeping on the discussions that Nicole was just raising about comorbidities and young people having a number of different diagnoses at any one time, or needing to. Oh. Okay, sorry, hoping everyone can hear me. I'm going to go to Tracy next with our next question, and it's keeping on the same line of discussion that Nicole was having about comorbidities of diagnoses. So, Tracy, do children with FASD experience demand avoidance? I'm noticing so many similarities with strategies for children who are autistic. That's been sent in to us.
Could you repeat that last bit?
Yeah, sure. Do children with FASD experience demand avoidance? I'm noticing so many similarities with strategies for children who have autism.
Okay. I guess my answer to that would be that I think if a teacher thinks that a child is using demand avoidance, I haven't used that term before, that would be a big flag that the demand was not able to be met by the child. They felt out of control and they weren't able to do it. It was really interesting listening to Nicole, because what she was saying is quite a little bit like what's happening in New Zealand, but also a little bit different. But one of the things that is often diagnosed with children who are struggling at school is oppositional defiance disorder and ODD, and often I'll get reports coming across my desk that this child has, we suspect that they've got ODD, and I'm thinking, well, for a start, I really don't like that term, and I'm just thinking, actually, that describes the mismatch of what's going on, rather than the fact that the child is totally demand avoidant. So I know that there is a lot of crossover with the way we treat young children with ASD and FASD, but I know that children with FASD are really keen to meet, that they really want to do the right thing and they try really hard to do that. So if they're saying no and you're not doing it, then that's where you're going to stop and think, not won't, but can't, and go down that track and try and figure out what really is going on here.
Thank you, Tracy, and I'm very grateful that you've answered most of our tricky questions today. I'm sorry that wasn't on purpose, that I was directing them at you. We have reached the end of today's session, and I'm aware that many of our participants probably have to run off, and particularly for you in New Zealand, it's getting very late, so thank you for staying with us, and anyone in New Zealand who's tuning in as well. What we are sharing with you now is one of the graphics that Will has been illustrating throughout today's session So I believe you can see that on the screen at the moment, and you will be able to access this after as well. You can find that on fasdhub.org.au. So this is just from today's discussions, which is fantastic. He's been doing that live while we've been chatting away. So I think while we can look through that at another time, I think that today I'm really noticing across all of our discussions, a lot of the reframing of behaviours and the can't versus won't has come up again and again. So as professionals and as adults engaging with children and young people who might have FASD, it's up to us to stop and think about what is it that it's not that they just won't do, but actually what is it that they can't do. I think there was also a lot of different discussions about modifying expectations as adults engaging with these children and young people in any role. And also adapting environments where appropriate as well has been a major focus. So thank you all to our 4 wonderful speakers today for sharing both your personal and your professional experiences with us. It's been so valuable, and I'm sure everyone who is listening in can agree. As I have said, the recording of this particular session, as well as the graphic illustrations and a whole number of other resources, even the video that we shared with you today, and some of the other graphics will be shared with you and will be available on fasdhub.org.au. So please do check that out. I have another little reminder that we actually have some awards open at the moment through the FASD Hub website. They are the FASD Research Australia Awards 2020. There are 3 different categories. So anyone listening who can think of someone who would be perfect for one of these 3, please do log on to the website and nominate. We have the Sue Myers Lifetime Achievement Award, the Community Award, and the Early and Mid-Career Researcher Award. So all 3 of those categories nominations are open until just over a week left, and winners will be announced on the 12th of November. So please do participate in that if you can. I would just like to once again thank everybody who has been listening in today, and I'm aware that you probably have many other things going on, so thank you for making this a priority and for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you all. We look forward to seeing you again, whether it's in person or virtually. So thank you again. Take care.